All right, so are you ready for a deep dive into some seriously revolutionary reading? We're going to be tackling Thomas Paine's Common Sense.
Mhm.
And this pamphlet, I'm telling you, it was like electrifying back in 1776. It practically launched a nation.
It did.
And, it might sound like ancient history, but
Yeah.
trust me, Paine's ideas about, like, society, government, who should be in charge, still sparking debates even today.
What's remarkable is how Paine, he just cuts through all the noise, right? Imagine yourself in 1776, monarchy's all you've ever known.
Right, like it's the only system.
Exactly. But Paine comes along and he doesn't just complain about King George, he goes for the whole system.
Wow.
He even says, time makes more converts than reason.
Mm.
Like he knew his ideas were bold, but they would resonate eventually.
He was planting seeds for a massive upheaval.
Yeah.
So where does he even begin with this takedown of tradition?
Well, he draws a very deliberate line between society and government. Society, for Paine, that's all the good stuff. Our needs, our desires, the pursuit of happiness, it's our natural state. Government, not so much.
So it's like we like hanging out, building stuff, making life better, and then government shows up.
And starts setting up rules. Paine actually calls government a necessary evil, a consequence of, well, our own flaws. If everyone was perfectly moral and just, who would need laws and punishments, right?
Right.
He even compares it to clothing, something we need because we're, well, no longer in a state of innocence.
Oh, interesting.
It is a bit of a bleak outlook, but this distinction is crucial because it underpins his entire argument for independence.
So it's deeper than just King George is a tyrant. Paine saying the whole power structure is flawed.
Which is kind of insane for the time, right?
Yeah.
Monarchs weren't just rulers. They were practically appointed by God in people's minds.
And Paine takes that head on. He doesn't just critique the British monarchy. He dismantles the entire concept of hereditary rule, calls it an insult and imposition on future generations.
Denying them any say in who governs them. Imagine reading that in a world where your king's lineage supposedly stretches back to some divine right.
Right, yeah. Talk about bold. He's going right for the foundation of their beliefs.
Right.
Didn't he even compare hereditary rule to original sin or something?
He did. He uses biblical examples like Gideon and Samuel refusing to be made kings, emphasizing that even in scripture, God wasn't a fan of earthly rulers claiming absolute power, which was brilliant. For an audience steeped in religious thought, he's speaking their language, but flipping the script, pushing them to question why they accept certain forms of power as inherently legitimate.
It's like you claim to follow the Bible. Well, open your eyes. And it wasn't just fiery rhetoric either. Paine lays out practical reasons why America should break away. Did he actually think the colonies could survive on their own, economically speaking?
He absolutely did. He argues that America's resources, its potential markets, are enormous. He points out that they could trade directly with other European nations, cut out the British middlemen.
I see.
He even challenges the assumption that Britain is essential for their security, suggesting a strong economic position would naturally make them less vulnerable to attack or coercion.
So no more tea taxes, and we get to keep the profits. Sign me up.
But there were still people who were hesitant, right? What did Paine have to say to those urging caution and, trying to stick with Britain?
Oh, he doesn't mince words. He calls them interested men, weak men, prejudiced men, basically anyone who thinks better of Europe than it deserves.
Wow.
He uses incredibly strong language for the time, especially for a pamphlet meant to reach a wide audience.
He knew he had to be bold to break through the fear and uncertainty of revolution. And to drive that point home, he takes his readers straight to the front lines of British oppression in Boston. He describes the city suffering under British rule as a stark warning. He doesn't shy away from the emotional impact, asking people to imagine the pain of losing their homes, their livelihoods, their loved ones. He even says, "The blood of the slain, the weeping voice of nature cries, 'tis time to part."
Man.
This isn't just about politics anymore. It's about basic human dignity, the right to self-determination.
Powerful stuff. But declaring independence is one thing. Actually governing a new nation, that's a whole other can of worms. So what kind of system did Paine envision replacing British rule?
That's where things get really interesting. Paine believed that complex systems, well, they're more prone to corruption.
Makes sense.
Harder to fix when they break down, so he advocated for a straightforward structure, clear lines of accountability, a government of the people in the truest sense.
Keep it simple, keep it transparent. Makes sense. But how do you actually build that from the ground up?
He had some pretty radical ideas for the time.
Radical, like what? Give me the Paine-flavored government plan.
Okay, so picture this. Annual assemblies with a rotating presidency.
Rotating.
Yeah. So no one person or region could, like, hold on to power for too long?
Wow, so it's like he's anticipating the problems of political dynasties before they even exist.
Right. He's like, nip it in the bud.
Mm.
And to ensure even more direct representation, he suggested dividing the colonies into smaller districts. It's all about keeping the government accountable to the people, preventing those in power from, well, becoming too detached.
Okay, so I'm seeing some echoes of the U.S. system here, right? Like checks and balances, representation based on population.
Mm-hmm.
But didn't Paine also want something like a continental charter? What was that all about?
That was his answer to protecting individual rights.
Okay.
A document guaranteeing things like freedom of speech, freedom of religion.
Well, essentially like a precursor to the Bill of Rights.
Exactly. He recognized that just having elections wasn't enough. You needed a system that actively protected individual liberties from government overreach.
So Paine's pamphlet wasn't just about, like, breaking free from Britain. It was a blueprint for a whole new kind of nation, one where power rests with the people and individual rights are, like, paramount. Which is kind of mind-blowing for the time, right? Most revolutions were just about swapping one king for another.
Exactly. And he doesn't shy away from, like, the global significance of what he's proposing either. He writes, "The birthday of a new world is at hand." This wasn't just about American independence. It was about proving that a government based on the principles of liberty and self-determination could actually work.
It's like he's sending out a signal to the world. Watch and learn, because we're trying something brand new here.
Mm.
But even with all this idealism, Paine doesn't strike me as naive. Like, he'd lived in the world. He knew things could go wrong.
Oh, absolutely. He specifically warns against simply replacing one form of tyranny with another. He understood that power, even in the hands of the people, could be corrupted. He even calls out those who might, try to exploit the chaos of revolution for their own gain.
So are you saying common sense is also a warning, not just a celebration of freedom?
It's both.
Interesting.
It's like he's saying, look, independence is awesome, but don't think for a second that the fight for a just and equitable society, it ends there.
Right.
He's basically saying that vigilance, active participation, these are essential for preserving the freedoms you fight so hard to win.
It's a message that feels, well, eerily relevant today, don't you think? I mean, look at the state of things.
Exactly. And that's what makes common sense so fascinating, right? It's not just a historical document. It's a timeless reminder that that struggle for liberty, for self-governance, it's ongoing. We can't take our freedoms for granted. We have to constantly be on guard against those who would seek to, well, undermine them.
It's a sobering thought, but also empowering in a way.
Yeah.
Knowing that, even back then, people were grappling with these same questions. Of power, freedom, how to build a better society.
And that's the beauty of, diving deep into these historical texts. They speak to us across centuries, reminding us that that fight for a just and equitable world, it's a marathon, not a sprint.
And sometimes you need a good fiery pamphlet to, like, light the way.
Speaking of fiery, didn't Paine have some choice words for folks who use the whole America needs Britain's protection argument? It's not like the colonies were exactly swimming in military might back then.
Oh, he goes there. Paine dismantles that argument piece by piece.
Okay.
He basically says, look, Britain doesn't protect us out of the goodness of their hearts. They do it to protect their own interests, their trade routes, their global dominance. He even uses the example of Hanover.
Hold on, Hanover. Refresh my memory on that one.
Right. So Hanover, it was basically a personal fiefdom of the British monarchy.
Oh.
And when France threatened Hanover, Britain went to war to protect it, even though it had nothing to do with the American colonies.
So Paine's using this real-world example to say, see, they only protect what benefits them directly, not out of some sense of, like, loyalty or obligation. Precisely. And then he goes on to dismantle, like, the whole parent country argument, calling it false, selfish, narrow, and ungenerous. He reminds everyone that America, well, it was built by immigrants from all over Europe.
Right, not just England.
Exactly. People fleeing oppression, seeking a better life. So this idea that they owe unwavering loyalty to a distant king, a king who doesn't even represent their diverse heritage, it starts to crumble under scrutiny.
It's like he's saying, we're our own people now, with our own identity and our own destiny to forge. Which, I mean, that takes guts to say when you're staring down the most powerful empire on earth. But it wasn't just political or even moral arguments that fueled Paine's call for independence, right? He also made a compelling economic case, didn't he?
Absolutely. He argues that America, it's a land of vast resources and untapped potential. He points out that by trading directly with other European nations, the colonies could actually be far more prosperous. He even challenges the assumption that they need Britain's navy for protection, suggesting that a strong economic position would, well, naturally make them a less appealing target.
So it's not just about, like, lofty ideals of freedom and self-determination. It's about practical matters, like
Yeah.
who controls the purse strings, who benefits from American labor and resources.
Exactly. He's appealing to both the hearts and minds of his readers, showing them that independence isn't just, the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do.
Which makes Common Sense a brilliant piece of propaganda, as well as a philosophical treatise.
Absolutely. It's a masterclass in persuasion, blending soaring rhetoric with sharp wit and, well, hard-hitting facts.
But it wasn't all smooth sailing from there, right? Even after declaring independence, the colonists still had to figure out how to govern themselves. And as Paine himself pointed out, that's where things could get really tricky.
He knew that, even with the best of intentions, building a truly just and equitable system, well, it wouldn't be easy. And that's where his warnings about the dangers of power become even more relevant.
So they did it. They declared independence. I bet there were some fireworks. But then what then? Building a government from scratch just seems, I don't know, kind of daunting.
It is. And Paine knew that even with the best intentions, power, it can be a slippery slope.
Yeah.
He specifically warns against just swapping, one tyrant for another,
Right.
emphasizing that the fight for liberty doesn't just end with, like, a change of management.
Yeah, it's like that saying, meet the new boss, same as the old boss, but with way higher stakes. So how do you even prevent that? Did he have any, like, concrete ideas about how to keep a new government in check?
Well, remember his emphasis on simplicity. He truly believed that overly complicated systems, they were just more vulnerable to corruption, harder for everyday people to understand, let alone hold accountable. You know what I mean?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, the more layers there are to something, the easier it is to kind of hide things.
Yeah.
So what did he propose instead?
Well, he was a huge advocate for direct representation and limiting the terms of those in power.
Okay.
He even suggested, get this, a rotating presidency.
Kind of rotating
Just
president.
like he envisioned for the Continental Congress.
Wow.
The idea was to prevent, any one person or faction from becoming too entrenched.
That's fascinating. Yeah, you can definitely see that idea reflected in things like, I don't know, term limits for elected officials today. Although it's not always as direct as a rotating presidency, obviously.
Yeah, right. And remember how he championed a continental charter to, like, safeguard individual rights? He understood that elections alone, they weren't enough. You needed, like, clear written protections for things like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, that sort of thing.
Which is, I mean, essentially what we now know as the Bill of Rights.
Yeah.
It's just incredible to see how those early ideas, radical for their time, they help shape the foundation of the United States government.
Yeah, and it really speaks to the enduring power of Paine's vision,
Yeah.
He wasn't content with simply critiquing the way things were. He dared to imagine a better future, and then he laid out a roadmap for achieving it.
And he wasn't afraid to think big either.
Yeah.
I mean, he literally said the birthday of a new world is at hand when he was talking about American independence.
Yeah.
Talk about confidence in your convictions.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. He truly believed that the American experiment had the potential to change the world, to inspire others to fight for their own liberty, their own self-determination. And in many ways, I mean, he was right. His ideas about individual rights, representative government, the importance of a government that's accountable to its people, they continue to resonate even across centuries and continents.
It's true. But as we've been discussing, Paine wasn't, I don't know, naive about the challenges that lay ahead. He knew that even with, like, the best of intentions, there would always be those who would try to, exploit the system for their own gain. It's almost as if he's sending a message to future generations, right? Like urging us to stay vigilant, to never, ever take our freedoms for granted.
Exactly. And that's what makes Common Sense such a compelling read, even today. It's a reminder that the fight for a just and equitable society, it's ongoing. And it requires, active participation from all of us. We can't just rest on the laurels of, those who came before us. We have a responsibility, right, to safeguard those hard-won freedoms and to continue to strive for, well, a more perfect union, as they say.
It is a sobering thought, but it's also an inspiring one at the same time. It reminds us that we're all a part of this grand experiment in self-governance, and that we all have a role to play in shaping its future. So the next time you find yourself questioning the state of the world, remember Thomas Paine, the pamphleteer who dared to challenge the status quo and sparked a revolution that continues to this very day.
I love that. And hey, maybe pick up a copy of Common Sense while you're at it. You might be surprised at how relevant it still feels all these centuries later.
I think I will. Thanks so much for taking this deep dive with us.
Oh, of course, anytime.
Until next time, everyone, keep asking those questions, keep exploring, and keep the spirit of 76 alive.